March 6, 1944, 23,000 feet above Germany. The air is thin enough to burn your lungs. Frost creeps along the inside of the fuselage. Engines drone in a steady, numbing rhythm as a lone B-17 named Hell's Fury pushes deeper into enemy airspace. Then the call comes. 12 fighters, 6 o'clock high. Behind the bomber, 12 Messerschmitt Bf-109s begin to form up, tight, disciplined, patient. They're not attacking yet. They're organizing, waiting for the moment when doctrine says they will strike together all at once. Every American tail gunner is trained for this moment. Wait, conserve ammunition, fire only when the fighters commit, because reacting is how bombers survive. But in the tale of Hell's Fury, Staff Sergeant Michael Mike Donovan doesn't wait. He watches the formation take shape. He feels the seconds slipping away, and instead of preparing to endure the attack, he opens fire. 4 minutes later, 12 German fighters will be falling out of the sky. 0 Americans will be dead. And the rules of air combat will never be the same. The tail gunner's position is a cold metal coffin bolted to the back of the bomber. There is no armor worth mentioning. No room to move, just .250 caliber machine guns, a narrow field of vision, and nothing behind you but empty sky. Every fighter coming from the rear is aiming straight at your spine. In the 8th Air Force, everyone knows the numbers, even if no one likes to say them out loud. Tail gunners die more than anyone else on a B-17. They're the last line of defense, and the first target the enemy wants gone. German pilots know it too. They come in from high 6 o'clock, diving fast, using gravity and speed to close the distance. The lead fighter draws fire. The wingmen wait. When the gunner focuses on one target, the others slip closer, lining up the kill. That's how it's supposed to work. American doctrine is built around survival through discipline. Bombers fly in tight formations, guns overlap. Gunners are taught to stay calm, stay defensive, and above all, don't waste ammunition. You wait until the enemy commits, then you fire when the odds are best. The idea is simple. Endure the attack long enough to make it home. But endurance has a cost. By early 1944, bomber crews are being chewed apart over Germany. Missions are getting deeper. Escorts can't always stay with them. And every crew knows that once the fighters arrive, the tail gunner is on borrowed time. Inside Hell's Fury, the men don't talk about it. They don't have to. They've already lost one tail gunner. He survived, but he refused to fly that position again. When Michael Donovan volunteers to take his place, the reaction isn't relief. It's silence. The pilot, Captain James Whitmore, pulls him aside before the next mission. He doesn't threaten him, doesn't lecture. He just lays out the truth. More than a third of tail gunners don't finish their tour. Donovan listens, nods once. Then he climbs into the most exposed seat on the aircraft, straps himself in, and waits for the fighters to come. Because to him, waiting has never felt like survival. Michael Donovan didn't grow up learning how to wait. He grew up in South Boston, where hesitation got you hurt and backing down got you buried. His father worked the docks. His older brother boxed Golden Gloves. Fights were a fact of life, not a failure of discipline. By the time Donovan was 17, he'd been in more fights than most men would admit to in a lifetime. He lost a few, won most, and learned a lesson that never left him. If you let the other guy decide when the fight starts, you don't control how it ends. When Pearl Harbor was hit, Donovan enlisted immediately. The Army Air Forces wanted him on ground crew. He refused. He demanded gunnery school. From the first day, he was a problem. Instructors told him he was too aggressive, too quick to fire, too willing to expose himself to return fire instead of staying hidden and disciplined. They taught patience. He practiced speed. They taught restraint. He practiced initiative. One instructor finally pulled him aside and told him flatly that gunners like him didn't live long. Donovan didn't argue. He just answered quietly. Dead gunners don't shoot back. Live ones do. He graduated near the top of his class, not because he was the best shot, but because he was the fastest. Donovan could acquire a target and bring his guns onto it quicker than anyone they trained. While other gunners waited for fighters to drift into their sights, Donovan hunted them as they approached. To the training command, that made him dangerous. To a bomber crew flying into Germany in 1944, it made him something else entirely. When Donovan arrived at the 391st Bomb Group, Hell's Fury already had a reputation: 3 missions, 2 near-catastrophic fighter encounters. The last, Tail Gunner, had survived, but he'd refused to climb back into that seat. Donovan volunteered without hesitation. Captain Whitmore interviewed him personally. He didn't sugarcoat the statistics. He didn't talk about glory. He talked about odds: 38% casualty rate. Donovan did the math in his head and shrugged. "Then I've got 62% going for me," he said. "I'll take it." Whitmore stared at him for a long moment, then finally shook his head. "You're insane," he said. "Probably," Donovan replied, "but you'll fit right in." Neither of them knew yet that Donovan wasn't just wrong for the job. He was wrong for the entire way the war in the air was being fought. Donovan's first mission with Hell's Fury came on March 2, 1944. The target was deep in Germany. Ball-bearing factories, vital, heavily defended, and guaranteed to draw fighters. The crew ran through the checklist: engines steady, formation tight, everyone waiting for the inevitable call. It came just after crossing into hostile airspace, fighters forming at 6 o'clock high. Standard procedure said to wait. Donovan didn't. As the Bf-109s began to assemble behind the formation, still distant, still out of what most gunners considered effective range, Donovan squeezed the triggers: short bursts at extreme distance, tracers arcing through open sky. Most of the rounds missed. That wasn't the point. The German formation wavered. One fighter peeled away early. Another broke off its line to avoid the incoming fire. The attack run lost its shape before it ever began. When the fighters finally committed, they came in piecemeal instead of together. One Bf-109 pushed too close, too alone. Donovan tracked it smoothly and fired again, this time at lethal range. The fighter burst into flame and fell away beneath the bomber. By the time the rest disengaged, Hell's Fury hadn't been hit once. On the ground, the crew. Chief checked the ammunition boxes and stared at the numbers. "You fired 1,600 rounds," he said. "Standard load is 2,000. Donovan nodded. "That's 80% of your ammo," the crew chief continued, "on one mission." "And we're still flying," Donovan replied. "I'll take that trade." The next mission, 2 days later, Donovan pushed further. When the fighters formed up again, he didn't target the lead aircraft. He ignored the one drawing attention and aimed for the second fighter in line, the wingman. The pilot who wasn't expecting to be shot at yet, the one flying steady, predictable, trusting the formation to protect him. The wingman exploded. The lead fighter broke off instantly. The entire attack unraveled. By the time they landed, word had spread through the crew. Donovan wasn't just aggressive. He was breaking rules everyone had been taught to trust. He was wasting ammunition. He was firing outside doctrine. He was exposing himself instead of waiting safely behind the guns. But mission after mission, Hell's Fury came back intact. And slowly, an uncomfortable truth began to take shape. Donovan wasn't surviving in spite of breaking the rules. He was surviving because of it. German fighter pilots didn't attack bombers at random. By 1944, their methods were refined, drilled, and brutally efficient. They didn't rush in, they observed. They formed up out of range, high and behind, where a bomber's guns were weakest and reaction time was shortest. The approach was methodical. The lead fighter dove first, fast and obvious. His job wasn't to score the kill, it was to draw fire, to make the tail gunner focus, to force him into the rhythm he'd been trained to follow. While the gunner tracked the lead aircraft, the wingmen held their line. They flew steady, predictable, conserving energy and position. They waited for the moment when the guns shifted, when attention narrowed. Then they struck. 2 seconds of cannon fire at close range was usually enough. Control cables severed, the tail chewed apart, a bomber crippled, falling out of formation, easy prey for the next pass. The system relied on one assumption, that the bomber crew would react, that the gunner would wait until the attack began, that fear and discipline would keep him predictable. Donovan saw the pattern not because he studied manuals, but because he watched it unfold in real time. He noticed when formations tightened, when pilots stopped maneuvering and started committing, when confidence replaced caution. That was the moment he chose to fire, not to hit, to interrupt. Every early burst forced a decision: break formation or fly through a wall of tracers, hesitate or commit alone, order or chaos. The German pilots weren't cowards, they were professionals, and professionals didn't like uncertainty. When Donovan fired before they were ready, he took away their timing. When he targeted wingmen instead of leaders, he shattered trust inside the formation. Every pilot suddenly had to think about his own survival instead of the plan. Attacks came in ragged, out of sync, less coordinated each time. The initiative, something German fighters were trained to control, slipped away. Inside Hell's Fury, Donovan wasn't reacting anymore. He was deciding when the fight began. And once that happened, the bomber was no longer just enduring the attack, it was shaping it. The briefing room at Framlingham was quiet that morning. Not the usual nervous chatter or forced jokes, just the sound of boots on concrete and papers being folded and unfolded again. Everyone knew where they were going: Augsburg, deep, heavily defended, too far for escorts to stay with them the entire way. Intelligence officers didn't bother dressing it up. German fighters would be waiting, in numbers. Losses were expected. Captain James Whitmore stood at the front of the room, studying his crew. He didn't talk about heroism. He talked about survival. Fly tight, trust the formation, follow procedure. When he finished, Michael Donovan raised his hand. Whitmore paused, already wary. "Permission to try something different, sir." The room shifted. Heads turned. Donovan didn't elaborate yet. He waited. Whitmore folded his arms. "Different how?" "Aggressive fire," Donovan said. "I want to engage fighters before they commit. While they're still forming up, force them to defend before they attack." Whitmore frowned. "That burns ammunition." "Yes, sir. You'll be dry before the real fight. Or I'll prevent the real fight from happening." That got a reaction, not agreement, discomfort. Whitmore walked closer, lowering his voice. "We've been flying this way for 2 years, Sergeant. You know why we wait?" Donovan nodded. "Because that's how we were taught to survive." "And you think that's wrong?" Donovan didn't hesitate. "Sir, 38% of tail gunners don't finish their tour. That's not survival. That's hoping the odds don't pick you." Silence hung in the room. Whitmore studied him for a long moment. He thought about the last tail gunner, the damage they'd taken, the way German attacks always seemed to arrive on their terms. Finally, he spoke. "You get one mission," he said. "One. If we get shredded, you're off that gun, permanently." Donovan nodded once. "Fair trade, sir." Whitmore exhaled slowly. "Takeoff is 0647. As the crew stood and filed out, no one said a word. They all understood what had just happened. For the first time, Hell's Fury wasn't planning to endure the next fighter attack. It was planning to meet it head-on. The fighters appeared at 9:19, 12 contacts, 6 o'clock high, 2,000 yards out. From the tail of Hell's Fury, Donovan watched them through a narrow arc of glass. The Messerschmitts were still climbing into position, sliding into a clean, disciplined formation. No weaving, no diving, no urgency. They weren't attacking yet. This was the moment every manual told him to wait through. Donovan didn't. At 2,000 yards, well outside what most gunners would even consider, he opened fire. Not a long spray. Controlled bursts, tracers stitching the empty sky between bomber and fighter. The reaction was immediate. The German formation scattered. One fighter broke hard right, another dipped instinctively. Wingmen hesitated, unsure whether to commit or pull back. The clean geometry of the attack dissolved into confusion. "Donovan, cease fire!" Whitmore's voice snapped over the intercom. "You're wasting ammunition." "Negative, sir," Donovan replied calmly. "Watch." The fighters regrouped, but something had changed. They didn't dive in together. They edged forward cautiously now, probing instead of committing. Donovan waited this time. At 1,500 yards, he fired again. Short, deliberate bursts, not to hit, but to dominate the space they needed to attack through. One BF-109 held course, an experienced pilot, aggressive, unwilling to break. Donovan let him close. 1,400 yards, 1,200, 1,000. Now, the fighter filled his sights. Donovan squeezed the triggers and held them down. 200 rounds tore through the closing space in 3 seconds. The Messerschmitt flew directly into the stream. The engine burst apart. The aircraft disintegrated in mid-air. "Good kill," someone breathed over the intercom. Donovan didn't answer. He was already tracking the next target. The remaining 11 fighters pulled back instinctively, climbing away to regroup. That alone should have ended the attack. It didn't. Within seconds, the German pilots reformed, tighter this time, angrier. They had just watched one of their own vanish in a fireball, and now they understood something was wrong with this bomber. They adjusted. 6 fighters lined up directly behind Hell's Fury. 5 more slid outward, drifting toward the 7 o'clock position, preparing to split Donovan's attention and overwhelm the rear defenses. This was the counter to aggressive gunnery. Divide the threat, force hesitation. Donovan saw it coming. He didn't try to cover everything. "Waist gunners," he called. 7 o'clock, I've got 6. Price and Johnson opened up immediately, their guns flashing as the outer group turned toward them. Donovan ignored the tracers cutting across his peripheral vision and locked onto the 6 fighters dead astern. They were coming fast now. He chose the lead aircraft and fired. The burst was short, precise. The Bf-109 shuddered, then erupted, breaking apart as it tumbled downward. The remaining 5 wavered, just for a fraction of a second. Donovan shifted to the next aircraft and fired again. Another explosion. The formation collapsed. In less than 30 seconds, 3 fighters were gone, their wreckage scattering across the sky. The remaining pilots broke hard, diving away not to reposition, but to escape. Inside the bomber, no one spoke. The intercom was silent except for the steady hum of engines and the faint rattle of spent casings rolling across the floor of the tail compartment. Donovan glanced at his ammunition counters. 1,200 rounds expended, 800 left, enough for 1 more sustained fight, maybe 2 brief ones. The question wasn't whether the Germans could still attack, it was whether they would. For several minutes, nothing happened. The formation pressed on, deeper into Germany, every man aboard listening for the call that hadn't come yet. Then, 15 minutes later, radar lit up again. More fighters, this time not 12, 18. The next attack didn't come in neat lines. It came like a flood. 18 fighters appeared. Almost at once, spreading across the rear of the formation, not waiting, not organizing. They'd learned the lesson from the first group. Overwhelm him. They came from 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 4, multiple angles, overlapping fields of fire, cannon flashes already visible as they closed the distance. The standard response in this situation was defensive desperation. Divide fire, try to cover everything. Hope the formation held long enough for the fighters to lose interest. Donovan chose something else. He ignored the attacks from the sides. He ignored the flashes of cannon fire streaking past the tail. He focused everything on 6 o'clock. "Ball turret, waist, cover your sectors," he said, his voice steady. "I'm holding the stern." 6 fighters dove straight toward him, closing at nearly 400 knots. At that speed, there was no room for hesitation, no second chances. Donovan opened fire at 1,200 yards, not bursts. Sustained stream. He walked the tracers forward, forcing the lead fighter to choose. Break formation or fly through the fire. The pilot held course. At 800 yards, the rounds found metal. The canopy shattered. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell away. 5 left. Donovan shifted instantly, firing where the next fighter would be, not where it was. Pure instinct, no time to think. The second Messerschmitt flew directly into the stream of bullets. The engine detonated. The sky flashed orange. 3 seconds had passed. The remaining fighters broke hard, pulling out of their dives, abandoning the attack entirely. "Jesus Christ," Whitmore's voice cracked over the intercom. "That's 2 more." Donovan didn't answer. He was reloading. The final ammunition belt slid into place with a metallic snap. He checked the counter. 400 rounds. That was it. The bomber pressed on toward Augsburg, damaged but still flying. Below them, smoke from the burning. Fighters spiraled down toward the earth. For several minutes, the sky stayed quiet. Then, radar operators picked up new contacts, dozens, 36 fighters, closing fast. Combined with the aircraft already shadowing them, Hell's Fury was about to face nearly 50 enemy fighters. Donovan looked at the ammunition counter again. 400 rounds against an entire group. The math didn't work, unless he changed it. The German fighters didn't rush this time. They gathered. From the tail of Hell's Fury, Donovan watched them assemble nearly 2,000 yards back, a dense knot of aircraft circling, sliding into position, waiting for stragglers to join. This wasn't a patrol or a probe. It was a coordinated kill. 48 fighters now filled the sky behind the bomber, BF-109s and FW-190s weaving into structured waves, lead elements establishing attack vectors, trailing elements forming support lines, the Luftwaffe doing what it did best, turning numbers into inevitability. Captain Whitmore saw it immediately. "They're building a full assault," he said over the intercom. "If they hit together, we won't stop them." The formation, Hell's Fury, had been part of was gone now, drifted miles away during the earlier fighting. No escorts, no overlapping guns, just one bomber, alone in hostile sky. Donovan checked his ammunition, 380 rounds. He keyed the intercom. "Permission to engage before they're ready." There was a pause, long enough for the German formation to tighten even further. Whitmore answered quietly. "Explain." "They're vulnerable right now," Donovan said, "while they're organizing. If I wait, they hit us from every angle at once. If I fire now, I can break them before they move." "You'll be dry in seconds." "Yes, sir." Another pause. Then Whitmore made his decision. "Do it." Donovan didn't wait. He opened fire at maximum range, pouring sustained fire. Directly into the center of the forming mass, not aiming at aircraft, but at the space where coordination lived, where pilots watched each other, where discipline held them together. The effect was immediate and violent. One fighter caught fire and spiraled down. Two more collided as they tried to evade the unexpected wall of tracers. The tight formation unraveled into chaos, aircraft scattering in every direction, pilots abandoning attack vectors just to survive. 48 fighters became 48 individuals. No plan, no timing, no unity. Inside Hell's Fury, no one spoke. They were watching something they'd never seen before. One tail gunner had just shattered the largest fighter assault any of them had ever faced. But Donovan wasn't celebrating. He lifted his foot and felt the vibration of the guns slow. The counter ticked down. 180 rounds remaining, and the mission wasn't over yet. The German fighters came back faster than Donovan. Expected? 90 seconds. That's all it took for them to regroup, no longer in careful formations, no longer waiting for orders. This time they didn't bother with coordination. They swarmed. 12 fighters dove straight in from 6 o'clock at once, engines screaming, cannon fire already flashing as they closed. No lead aircraft, no decoys, just raw, overwhelming violence. Donovan didn't panic. He chose his targets, not the closest, not the loudest. He aimed for the middle of the swarm, the psychological center where confidence held the attack together. He fired 30-round bursts into 3 aircraft in quick succession. One exploded instantly. 2 more took hits and broke off trailing smoke. 9 fighters kept coming. The sky behind Hell's Fury turned white with muzzle flashes. 20-millimeter shells tore past the tail, some striking home. The bomber shuddered. Metal shrieked. Control cables screamed under strain. Donovan kept firing. Another fighter burst. Apart. Then another. 5 left. 400 yards. 3 seconds. Donovan tracked 1 aircraft and fired again. The Messerschmitt exploded at point-blank range, fragments whipping past the tail. 2 more broke off. 100 yards now. He squeezed the triggers. Nothing. The guns were dry. "All guns empty," Donovan said into the intercom. "I'm out." For the first time since the fighters appeared, the tail of Hell's Fury was defenseless. The German pilots knew it. They regrouped one final time. 27 aircraft left from the original mass. Losses too high to ignore, but the opportunity too perfect to waste. They lined up for a clean execution run. 6 o'clock low, tight formation, slow, deliberate. This was how you killed a bomber with no tail guns. Donovan watched them close. 400 yards, 300, 200. He had no ammunition left, but he still had one weapon. He traversed the empty guns smoothly, tracking the lead fighter. Exactly as if he were about to fire. No hesitation, no panic, perfect discipline. The German pilot saw it, saw the barrels aligned with his cockpit, saw the calm, deliberate tracking, and instinct overrode logic. He broke formation. The rest followed instantly. The attack collapsed without a single shot fired. "They're breaking off," someone whispered. "They're actually breaking off." And they did. The sky behind Hell's Fury emptied for the last time that day. Empty guns had become as powerful as loaded ones, because the enemy believed otherwise. For several seconds after the last fighters broke away, no one spoke. The engines droned on, the bomber held course, and slowly, almost cautiously, the crew began to realize something unbelievable. They were still alive. "Damage check," Whitmore finally said. Reports came in one by one. The ball turret had taken hits but was still operational. The rudder showed stress fractures. Hydraulic lines were damaged. 47 bullet holes scarred the fuselage. 13 cannon strikes had punched into the airframe, but nothing vital had failed. Hell's Fury could still fly. They reached Augsburg. Bomb bay doors opened. The aircraft factory below disappeared beneath falling bombs, smoke boiling upward to meet them. Then the long turn home began, back through the same hostile sky. German fighters appeared again later that afternoon, shadowing the formation at a distance, but none moved into attack. Word had already spread. One bomber, one tail gunner, losses too high to justify another try. When Hell's Fury finally touched down at Framlingham, 9 hours after takeoff, ground crews rushed the aircraft counting damage, shaking their heads in disbelief. In the tail section, the ammunition boxes were empty. Every round had been fired. Donovan climbed out of his position last. His hands were steady. No shaking. No visible sign of what had just happened. The crew chief looked into the empty gun bays and exhaled slowly. "You used everything," he said. Donovan nodded. "Didn't have enough to waste." The story spread across Framlingham before the engines had finished cooling. Ground crews talked, airmen leaned in close, kill counts were compared, checked, rechecked. Radio intercepts from German channels confirmed what the crew already knew. 12 fighters destroyed, 4 more probable, 3 damaged, all credited to a single tail gunner. By the following morning, Donovan was ordered to report, not to his squadron, but to headquarters. He found senior officers waiting, intelligence staff, operations planners, men who had spent the war studying statistics and loss curves, now staring at numbers that didn't make sense. One of them finally spoke. "Sergeant Donovan," he said, "walk us through what you did yesterday." Donovan didn't dramatize it. He didn't talk about courage or instinct. He talked about timing, about firing before. Formations stabilized, about targeting wingmen instead of leaders, about forcing pilots to react instead of execute. He explained that the goal wasn't destruction, it was disruption. If you broke formation early, attacks never reached their lethal phase. If pilots became cautious, they stopped trusting each other. If you controlled the timing, the enemy lost theirs. The room stayed quiet as he finished. A general at the far end of the table leaned forward. "Can you teach this?" Donovan hesitated. "Not to everyone, sir." "Why not?" "Because it only works if the gunner thinks like a fighter," Donovan said. "You have to be willing to act first, to accept risk before the enemy forces it on you." The general nodded slowly. "Then find the right men," he said. "Effective immediately, you're reassigned." Donovan stiffened. "Sir, I'd prefer to stay with my crew." The general's answer was blunt. "Your crew is alive because of what you did. Other crews are dying because they don't know how." He paused, then added quietly, "Which matters more, 9 men or 9,000? Donovan didn't argue. Within days, the 8th Air Force authorized a new training program: aggressive tail gunnery, early engagement, psychological disruption. What had started as one gunner's refusal to wait was becoming official doctrine, and it would spread faster than anyone expected. The impact was visible within weeks. Before Donovan's tactics spread, tail gunner casualty rates in the 8th Air Force hovered near 40%. Missions deep into Germany meant enduring wave after wave of coordinated fighter attacks, each one deadlier than the last. By early summer of 1944, those numbers began to fall, not gradually, sharply. As aggressive tail gunnery was adopted across bomber groups, German fighter attacks started failing before they fully formed. More than half of planned assault runs were aborted early. Fighters. breaking off during approach instead of pressing into firing range. Bomber losses dropped. So did German confidence. Radio intercepts revealed warnings passed between Luftwaffe units. Certain formations were flagged as too dangerous to engage. Pilots were told to avoid bombers whose gunners fired early, aggressively, without hesitation. The psychological shift was unmistakable. Before, American crews feared the fighters forming behind them. Now, German pilots hesitated when they saw tracers reaching out long before the attack began. By mid-1944, analysts concluded that aggressive tailgunner tactics alone accounted for a significant reduction in bomber losses, thousands of airmen making it home who otherwise would not have. The strategy wasn't flawless. It demanded nerve, discipline, and a willingness to accept risk. But it worked. The enemy no longer controlled the timing of the fight, and in the air war over Europe, that changed everything. Michael Donovan never flew another combat mission after March 6, 1944. Within days, he was transferred out of operations and into training command. His war ended not with another sortie, but with classrooms, firing ranges, and long hours breaking habits that had been drilled into gunners since the beginning of the air war. He trained hundreds of tailgunners over the next months. Not all of them made it through. The doctrine demanded something specific: decisiveness under pressure, comfort with risk, the ability to act instead of react. Roughly a third washed out. Those who didn't became different kinds of gunners. They fired earlier. They disrupted formations. They forced German pilots to hesitate, to second guess, to break off attacks that once would have gone in clean and lethal. By the end of the war, graduates of Donovan's program accounted for a disproportionate share of confirmed fighter kills, and more importantly, a dramatic increase in bomber crews who made it home alive. German records, captured after the war, confirmed it from the other side. Luftwaffe after-action reports began warning pilots away from bombers with aggressive tailgunners. The recommendation was simple: avoid them. Find easier targets. What had started as one man's refusal to wait had reshaped the psychology of the air war itself. Donovan never claimed credit. After the war, he returned to Boston, worked construction, raised a family. He rarely spoke about what he'd done. When asked once why he never talked about it, he gave a simple answer: "I just did what worked." But across Europe, thousands of airmen owed their lives to that moment when one tailgunner decided survival didn't come from enduring the attack. It came from making the enemy afraid to begin it. On March 6, 1944, the air war over Europe didn't change because of a new aircraft, or a new weapon, or a new order from high command. It changed because one man, alone in the most exposed seat on a bomber, refused to wait for death to arrive on schedule. For 4 minutes, at 23,000 feet, Michael Donovan took everything the enemy expected him to do, and did the opposite. He attacked when he was supposed to endure. He disrupted when he was supposed to react. And in doing so, he proved that fear, once planted, could be as powerful as firepower. The moment passed quickly. The sky moved on. The war ground forward. But the effect didn't fade. Every bomber that made it home because a fighter broke off early. Every gunner who survived because the enemy hesitated. Every mission completed because an attack never fully formed. That was Donovan's legacy. Not 12 fighters destroyed, but thousands of lives saved, and all because one tailgunner understood something simple and brutal about survival in war. You don't survive by waiting for the fight to reach you. You survive by deciding when it begins.